sheet for those of you in person. For those of you online, we'll record the names from the online presence as well. All right, so a couple of things to go through today. We have all 3 quarters available to us for the day. So we'll definitely take up the first 2, and then if we need it, we have a spare one as well, just to go through anything that we need to go through for the day. We'll start with the acknowledgement of country. So we welcome the traditional custodians of the land on which we all gather today. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the First Peoples and First Scientists, educators, and healers. For those of you in attendance and online, there will be photos and videos, so please be advised that photographs and video will be taken at the event for use on the website and in other written and online publications. We're also recording box pops, and we'll be producing a video following the event. By entering the event, you consent to photography and video and using your image and likeness. If you do not wish to be photographed or videoed, please inform the HL7 AU teams. Anybody wearing a Spark shirt, come and let them know if you don't want your image or video. There will be a recording online. Jane or Talwinder, if you could start the recording, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Have done, thanks.
Thank you very much. So the meeting will be recorded, as are all technical design group meetings. The recording will be made available on the HL7 AU Confluence for the eRequesting TDG. By entering the event, you consent to the records of your participation, including the meeting recording. This is a hybrid meeting. We don't do that very often in eRequesting TDG. So to participate, if you're online and ask questions, make sure you raise your hands, both virtual and in the room. We'll keep an eye out for that. And a chair or someone else will call out your name and let you know when you can speak and when you can ask your questions. We'll also be using Menti today for voting. That's for all proposals as well, so that we can contribute to that sort of hybrid aspect instead of the usual Zoom. We're hosting on Teams today. So please go to menti.com and use the code 82719816. Michael Wilson or Ducci will be providing the Menti, and we'll be sharing those on the screen so everybody can see. If there are any issues, we'll have a way to get those across.
Are we doing the test now?
It's on the next slide or the slide after, so we'll come back to that. We will do a test, so just bear with us on that one. When you are speaking, please say your name, let people know who it is that is talking, and we will be watching the chat online as well. So if you have questions, you can throw those in the Teams chat, and we'll keep an eye out for those as well. If you want to speak, raise your hand online, and we'll call out when we're ready. There it is. So the HL7 AU decision-making process, we have the formal decision-making ceremony, and that is the raising of a formal motion, which is the what and the who. So your name and what it is that you're motioning for. We'll then wait for a second on that motion, and then the majority vote rules. So affirmative or negative, even abstain, it's the majority will take the action for that particular proposal. This is done for every single proposal, no matter what or how small or how large the content. We'll do a Menti practice now. So again, it's menti.com, 82719816. If everybody wants to join now, I might will just flick that across to the screen here so that we can see what's happening, and we'll give it all a go.
Use that QR code on this page as well.
And there's one on the screen as well, if you are at home. Please, only one device per person as well. Eight 82719816. We didn't raise a proposal for the practice. Anyone in the room having issues? Okay, that all seems to be working. So the practice vote has passed in the affirmative with 21. We're going to start again, I guess. Let's throw the meeting out. We'll come back another time.
Sorry.
Sorry, there will be a little bit of back and forth with the screen sharing today, so I apologize. Every time someone shares, I have to come back into the thing. Alrighty, agenda for today. We're going to start the approval of the minutes for the previous meeting, and then we'll go into the update on the ballot for comment, and then we'll start discussing the task waves. If we need the extra time, we do have that last quarter as well, just to continue and make sure that we can sort of get everything finished. A couple of breaks today at 12:45 for lunch and 2:45 for afternoon tea, and then we'll make a call on if we need to come back for that last session or not. So we'll start with the approval of minutes for the last regular meeting, which was the 15th of August. Somebody wants to raise a proposal for that one?
All motion.
Thank you. So Michael motioned for the approval of the minutes of the last meeting with a second by Michael O. Michael Osborne, thank you. I'm going to swap back. So this will be the first real Menti. So this one is for the proposal for approving the minutes of the last regular meeting.
I think
Get that. Coming. Okay. Okay. Look good. That's not good. There we go. Okay.
proposal to approve the minutes.
Thank you. So proposal one, the minutes, is to approve. All right, so we're going to close that in 3, 2, 1, and the minutes have been approved. Michael, do you want to try up the Menti and I'll share it from my screen?
Okay. Yep. Back to me now.
All right, back to Michael for ballot update.
Okay. My name's Michael Wilson. I'm Flight Solution Architect for the Spark program. So I'm going to be taking you through validating covenant now, as well as the initial waves of decision making on task. If you can't hear me in the room, or you can't hear me online, or can't hear others in the room, please let me know. So I'll make sure I speak up. And the same, we've only got, I think, the centre speaker on here. So the others on the fringes might need to speak up as we go. So just a quick update on the ballot comment. The sign up for ballot for eRequesting has closed. We're currently in the ballot period now until the 8th of September. We don't have any issues raised yet, but I suspect they will start coming in shortly, and the co-chairs will start triaging those, and there'll be propositions to bring to the TDG. So we won't wait until the ballot period is closed. If we have items to bring to the TDG before close, we'll start bringing them in. And then we'll take that period from the 9th of September to the end of October to reconcile all the issues that are being raised in the ballot. So that's going to take our attention for the next month or two while we focus on that. But we've got a bit of a window now where we can look at task, which isn't in the ballot, but it's something new that we can start with. We'll continue to iterate and develop eRequesting as we go. The ballot just gives us ballot comment gives a good opportunity to seek feedback from a wider audience. So today, all day, is about task. So we're going to really get down into the weeds of the fire spec on task. So I know there'll be different people in the room and online at different levels. So we're going to go right down into the weeds. If we're moving too fast, if you have questions as we go, please raise them. We want to bring everyone along on the journey, make sure we understand where we're going and what we're doing. So definitely don't be afraid to ask questions as we go. So in the TDG meeting last week, Angus gave us a good overview of what task is in fire. These are some of the links you can use outside of this meeting as well if you want to go and learn more about it as well. There's the task definition of task resource. There's an overview of workflow, and Angus took us through those things last week. And there's some information sessions there as well, recorded sessions from earlier in the year that were done as well on the fire workflow. So, and at the bottom, that Renee Spronk presentation, which we'll say how great that one is about getting a good overview. So these are all things that you can go and look up and learn more about it. So you might hear some things today that you don't quite understand. You can go back and look at these things and try and get a better understanding. So to date, all our focus for eRequesting has been on the service request. And that service request really represents the place's request for a diagnostic service. It looks at capturing the authorization from the request to perform the diagnostic request, records the requested intent to initiate the diagnostic request, and enables us to track the authorization request status by the place. So the service request there is all about the placer, about creating that request for a diagnostic service. And now we're going to start looking at task, which is focused on the biller side of things, which is recording the assignment of a service request to the biller and tracks the fulfillment status of the diagnostic request by the biller. The placer and the patient may monitor the status of fulfillment at that point as well. So there's the two halves here, the service request about the placer initiating the request, and then the task tracking fulfillment. So I think in this, when we're looking at it, that's the sort of distinction we want to make, the initial service request with the initial request, and the task is processing fulfillment. I might just take a quick break there and see if anyone wants to talk about that or have any questions about that role. I'll discuss any of that further. It's reasonably straightforward. I'm sure there'll be more questions as we go, but that's just setting the scene for the distinction between the service request and the task. So I don't know how clearly you can see this, but the two blue boxes there represent the service request and the task. So the service request has a requester, which is a practitioner role, has a subject, which is the patient. So the task itself will have the focus of the service request and also reference the same practitioner role and patient as well. And then the owner of the task will be the organisation. This is all up for debate. We'll discuss all of this today. This is just trying to give an indication where we might land with this. And the owner being the filler. So in this case, the filler will own the requesting task. And the requester is the practitioner role. So that just kind of gives us the distinction again between the service request and the task. We're going to discuss all of these elements, the focus for the owner, the requester, all of these things. We're going to go through this today. But this is likely where we may end up, and just writing that distinction and relationship. Any questions on that before I move off that one?
So, Michael, are we focusing in all the past activities that are owned by the dealer, or are we focusing on particular types of tasks that are relevant to the requester? So, as a requester, I'm not really interested in your internal workflow as a dealer. I'm very interested in where you are at and where I can get. So, which version are we talking about?
So we'll go through both to a degree, but primarily it's about where it is in the fulfillment process, right? And we'll talk about that, but we'll also talk about things like business status, life at a certain place. So, but primarily about that high level fulfillment process, not the internal fulfillment process.
Cool. Thank you.
I've got a question from Janie online as well.
Yeah, it's Jenny here, consumer rep. Can we please not use the word subject, individual will do?
So subject there is actually part of the fire spec. And I think someone else can correct me here if I'm wrong. But
no practitioner would want to be called a subject. It's sort of ancient history. It might be in your spec, but it shouldn't be on your slides. Just a gentle request.
yeah, some of this terminology we will be stuck with, given it's in the fire spec. I think the intent there is that subject could be any type of, in this case, it's a patient, but it isn't necessarily a patient, depending on how we're implementing it. Absolutely, for eRequesting, it is a patient, but it's a generic term in there that enables it to be flexible.
I think the US has been a bit slower in letting go of the subject than a lot of other countries. So that might be an influence. But just I'd like you to keep it in mind, please.
So Jamie, Heath Frankel here. We need to distinguish between the technical specifications, the clinical data information models, which are more domain orientated, if you like. So when you're working in that TDG space, those sorts of things are up for debate around what terms you use from a clinical perspective. Unfortunately, we have no say in the matter on what these terms are. They are dictated by the HL7 standard, and we have no chance of changing them. They are agreed upon internationally at a technical level. What we do is map these terms back to those clinical data terms that you have specified in the CDG. Those clinical data models versus these technical data models, which are aligned with the specification.
Okay, I accept that, but just keep in mind. Yeah.
So maybe our descriptions and those sorts of things that go alongside of these element names could include your clinical terms, clinically orientated terms, domain orientated terms. But as far as the element name is concerned, we can't change that.
David, did you have a question?
Yeah, just checking.
I think it was nicely answered. I don't think we'd ever see that word subject or requester show up. That's a way to describe a relationship in a data model. It's not necessarily something that a SIS vendor would show in their user interface.
Anyone? So along with task is the task state machine. So this is sort of your question, Stephen, about the tracking and fulfillment workflow. So this is the stock standard task state machine, going from draft to ready, requested, received, accepted, rejected, in progress. So part of it is we'll have to go through and work out what of these are appropriate, whether we leave it open to any of these or we need to lock it down to being only a specific set of states that we are interested in. But that's the sort of default state machine that is provided in Fire, and that's what we'll be using to track fulfillment of those states that are identified here. We'll go into this more when we get into status, but this is giving an indication of what we're looking at with task workflow. So with this as well, when the context of today, when we're making decisions about eRequesting and task, is to make sure that we base it back on what were agreed in the AU eRequesting use cases. So these use cases are part of our Confluence page. Okay, well, yeah. Here we go. Got it there. So these are the eRequesting use cases that we had originally identified. So some of these is around diagnostic imaging use cases, and there's some for pathology. The basic one is about creating the request, which is the request for a diagnostic imaging, and there's another one there for pathology. And then there's about creating a signed request and an unassigned request. So that's where this will link into task, because the task role is around fulfillment. And so whether the task has an owner being signed or not will be part of those use cases there for assigned and unassigned requests, as well as reassigning a request if the task already has an owner. How do we manage the reassignment of that task? There's also some use cases, the general use cases down here about tracking fulfillment of a service request, cancelling the request. Those use cases also apply around the task. So when we're making decisions today and ongoing in eRequesting, we're just coming back to these use cases to make sure that they're relevant to this, to constrain our scope of what we're making decisions on. So we'll jump, if we ever need to, and we're unsure about how we're making decisions, we can jump back to those use cases to see where there's something. So those that have been coming to the eRequesting TDG meetings in the past, you'll see we took this approach of service request, where we decided to have waves of decision making on the elements of the profile we're looking at. And this worked quite well, where it gave us the opportunity to break it down into smaller parts and not get too caught up on the whole thing. So we're going to attempt this approach again, with wave one being going through the task elements, identifying what elements I must support and the cardinality of those elements. Wave two is around data types, terminology, constraints. Wave three, searching. And then wave four is around system obligations and workflow management. So the additional overhead on wave four here, we had system obligations for service request, but workflow management is also a big part of the task, and we cover up in wave four. So wave four is going to be quite a big one. And we may even need to break that one down further. as we go, and then address any unresolved issues. One of the things we're trying to do here is to just look at task being for a single request and not focusing too much on groups or tasks or groups or service requests at the moment. While we know that's a requirement and that's something we do need to address, we need to be aware of while we're going through this. We're looking at having groups as potentially another set of waves, or discuss more in the wave 4, because it's something that could blow out and actually stall us if we get too caught up on groups early on. So I think we might have a number of different waves we come through for tasks, but the initial wave will be focused on single tasks or single service requests. So that's how we get.
Calling them storms.
Yes. We might have to have some different types of waves, yes. The tsunami. We're also, because we did so well with this approach last time, we're going to try and combine wave 1 and 2 in this meeting this morning, so that we're actually making decisions on must support, cardinality, data types, terminology, and constraints in the one go. If this doesn't work out for us, if we're getting too caught up on that, we might go back to splitting wave 1 and 2 out. But I think, given where we were at, and we've done this once before, that hopefully we might speed things up a little bit by going through wave 1 and 2 together. Right? If we have any issues, we can definitely come back to splitting them out. Because the key thing is we want to make sure that we're getting decisions made. And we can agree on things. Let's get decisions made on the things we can agree on, and then we can come back around to the things that are a bit meatier, a bit harder to make decisions on. And come back around to those when we need to. So this is where we're going to start. We're going to use this session for task waves 1 and 2. We'll see how we go, whether we get that finished in this session or we spill over into the next one as well. We've got plenty of time today, so we want to make sure that we get a chance to go through them. So that QR code, that link is to the R4 task profile. So follow along at home if you want to have a look at more detail in the room, and we'll work through it as we go. So part of this wave is about identifying the must support elements for tasks. So in this case, labeling an element as must support means that systems that produce or consume a resource shall provide support for the element in some meaningful way. What we're not going to do in wave 1 and 2 is talk about what that some meaningful way is. That comes into wave 4 when we talk about obligations. What does a placer have to do with that element? What does a filler have to do with that element? What does an eRequesting server have to do with that element? So we just need to identify the elements we think are important to an actor that's going to be in eRequesting. We don't have to, during these waves, talk about exactly what that means or the business rules and all that intricacy of the obligations. We just say it is important to an actor. As long as it's important to at least one actor in eRequesting, we would label it as must support. So when a profile contains an element labeled must support, it shall also make it clear what kind of support to provide. So that's the bit we'll come back to in wave 4, about defining what that must support means. And that must support will be implemented in terms of obligation codes on that element definition. So I think that's on the next slide. So if you're a producer of a fire resource, that might be things like populate, or populate if known, able to populate, or persist. And if you're a consumer, it might be, you know, when you get this, if you've got a must support element, you just an error or reject it if it's invalid, you must persist it, you must handle it, you must display it. So again, waves 1 and 2, we're not going to worry about which one of these it applies to, but basically if we think a task element is important to an actor and we would put one of these type of obligations on it, to an actor, we'll flag it as must support. Might check for any questions on that. Must support and obligations is reasonably complex, and Pete did about how many sessions did you do on that with the AU core? 6 sessions to get AU core across it. So
We'll come back to it.
Yeah, we'll come back to it in section 4, but is that enough of a definition now for people to think that they can identify must supports if we work through tasks? No objections to moving forward. All right, we're going to get stuck into it now. It's going to be a long day. So the approach taking to work through this is we'll identify some elements from the task that we think are important that could be flagged as must support. I've put a screenshot of the fire definition of that element. So that's what the base fire definition of it is. And then we'll work out whether that's something that we think is important for AU eRequesting. So this is the task 4, and the definition of this is an entity who benefits from performance of the service specified in the task, e.g. the patient. So the cardinality on this, the base value is 0, 1, says you don't have to have a patient. And the idea here is because the task is related to the service request, that the intent here is that would be the same patient as the service request subject, which we've already made must support mandatory element for service request. And so the task would replicate that and also include the same patient subject.
So by constraining the subject, we are excluding other possibility like there might be requests to do diagnostic tests on mental objects where there's the case of simple example infection health. You might want to be able to trace the sources, and so therefore those kind of tests might be done. And if we are constraining the patient, then we effectively say that those use cases are not supported at this point.
Yeah, and those use cases haven't been identified in our R1 scope that they're requesting. So all the R11 are around patient. And so yes, it would be constrained under the use cases that we have for eRequesting.
Can you just summarize the question, Mike?
Oh, sorry, could not be heard. I don't know if I can repeat that.
Yeah, I'm just kind of mindful about things like, say, for example, technical skills, biological contaminations, etc. And at this point in time, I'm okay that we make it as a R1 constraint.
Yeah, I think the Stephen's talking about use cases outside of a patient and about contamination tracking and some other scenarios. And I think coming back, this is why I framed it earlier around the use cases, that we have specific use cases for eRequesting. And those use cases are all focused around the patient. So for R1 of eRequesting, this would be focused around the patient.
Why do we have to repeat the patient? Why?
Are we moving on?
Given you need the service request to understand what is being requested, therefore in fulfillment, you're already carrying that because you have to be able to retrieve the service request. Why does it need to be repeated in the task if you already have access?
Very good question.
This is the beneficiary of the task, not necessarily the patient who benefits from a task. I mean, an organisation might benefit from a task performed with a patient as the subject, a patient as the target individual. But we're not allowing that. So this is not where you put, the laboratory, for instance, that a task is being directed to, or another organisation that the task is being directed to, in a more general sense. Is that not the case? Because if it is, it's put in organisation as a possibility.
I feel that task is extremely generic. Used in so many different use cases. In the context of fulfillment task, I think we're reading more into the term beneficiary than is intended. So in other use cases, beneficiary, the term, more abstract term of beneficiary might apply. But in the context of this, where the person that is receiving disorder is always a patient. But I'm hearing what you're saying, but I think we're probably a bit more into it than is really intended.
Well, it's just in a clinical context, most of the tasks that or the request that you make on behalf of the patient aren't for the patient. They're for an organisation or a provider. No, a patient sent care to me.
But that would be part of the service request, not the task, wouldn't it? We would need to capture that in as part of the service request itself, which we haven't today. The service request, the subject is the patient. And we have, given that that's at the point when the placer creates the order, that they would have to identify at that point.
Who is actually implementing the service request? It's different from who is benefiting from that implementation. And, you know, if your service request is, you know, do some pathology, the benefit, the person that benefits from that may be a hospital, and indirectly the patient, but or it may be a health fund that is being reflected on behalf of a health fund. And yes, it's all about a patient, but the beneficiaries can be quite different from the patient and from the service.
Defining benefit. I mean, it's probably glad to make money, therefore benefiting from stuff.
They're already specified in the service request. I'm saying there are other organisations that may benefit.
I don't believe they are, but
Oh, okay. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. That in the case of the pathology request, the pathology lab would already specify.
No, it wouldn't. No, it's in a task.
your definition of benefit, right? I can tell you, at some level, we can get the being done for a patient for their benefit, that they can help you. You could argue it's being done by a corporate pathology company to make money, and that's their benefit, or the doctor could have some benefit in it. But I would have thought about the patient, like the patient, what the task is for.
Well, often tests are done by hospitals to benefit the hospital in terms of their legal benefit, or in terms of their infection control, or are not actually directly going to benefit the patient. So, you know, in fact, let's take an example where you test for MRSA. In fact, a positive result is probably a negative benefit for the patient, but it's a positive benefit for the hospital. So, and that sort of testing is done routinely. It's not based on a particular patient. It's just, you know, everyone has it.
Except the focus is community testing at the moment, requesting, not hospital requesting. So
That's our use case.
I guess the question is, with this attribute, what is the need for it in our use case? Because I notice it is 0 to 1, so you don't have to include it.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you did have it and it was, let's say it was, could be a variety of different things. Well, I'm just, I guess, coming back to the use cases, what is that? What would we do with it? And how would it differentiate behaviour of the filler based on that balance?
The other one, there's requirements here. I don't know if it helps at all, but it's used to track tasks outstanding for a beneficiary. So again, in the context of other kinds of tasks, you can see that the beneficiary is not the patient. In the case of fulfillment of a service request, it doesn't make sense to have anything. It doesn't make sense to me to have anything other than the patient being the beneficiary in this case. Because what we're interested in is the tasks that are outstanding for this patient. You know, otherwise you're going to have tasks that are outstanding for hospitals or wards or nurses or whatever.
I think we're just overcomplicating the definition. It's really lack of a it's sort of concept or whatever. They're trying to generalise this term away from subject, and we've already had some concern about the term subject today. They're genericizing this even further and making it even more confusing. So the ultimate usability shop data.
Jane, I
was
think
gonna say-
online we're going. Yeah, Jane.
Janie?
I just wanted to say, yes, I agree with the last speaker. You're overcomplicating things, and it goes back to, well, why are you even developing this eRequest system? And surely the centre of the healthcare system is the patient, and the other or our auxiliary, and this is R1. So keep it, I say keep it simple and keep it to the task in hand, which from the present discussion seems like you've forgotten who you're developing this for. It could be the Department of Health and Aging, aged care. But I think it's for the patient. That's why the healthcare system is there. So keep it simple.
Can I just say, I think with one of the use cases for having patient as a must support in this, the like the collections, if you're saying you're trying to look at all of the outstanding collections for your side of something, but wouldn't it be useful? Did anyone find it useful? Maintenance? No?
I haven't, but I like the argument, but I haven't. I was going to say, to me, it's a bit like what Stephen said at the beginning, like, doing a pathology test on an autoclave or something, right? And then you could argue, well, it's not for patients, for the surgery trying to check that their autoclave is sterile, right? But, yeah, but kind of because we've decided that service request is just for patients, then you need this kind of a line. It's kind of just saying, this service request is for the patients, and therefore we task is also for that patient. Yeah, if we were going to extend service requests to say they can be done on devices, then yeah, sure, it pass would then say for a device or for an organisation. But I don't know if that's not in our scope.
So you had a comment?
Yeah, so just, I wanted to come back to Andy's initial question, which is, do we need it and ask it all if it's a request? And I think that is really dependent on the model that we use for the handling of requests and tasks together. As you're aware, those of you who read through documentation, there's quite a few different options there. And if there's no visibility by people who are handling the task of the request or the patient who is on the request, then I would say yes, we definitely need to have this included in an option. Whether it is always required or not, I leave that to the people that work in the space to decide. I would have thought that, as was previously mentioned, that it would be quite nice to be able to collate, certainly from a patient portal perspective, a list of tasks that are currently under in process and do that.
Like an airport and
Do a simple query based on that. And I know you can do it with request as well, but it just seems a bit simpler with that.
I think you summed it up in the last sentence right there. It's simpler. So it really depends on what is the focal resource that you're working with. If you work the focal resource is on a task, then having direct access to the patient resource through that reference would be much easier than going through the convoluted list of underscore includes and things like that, etc. And whereas if it's with the service request, getting the task associated with that, getting the patient, that's simple. But I think, yes, there's some redundancy here. Should it be mandatory? That I must support, I think it should be must support. Whether it's mandatory, that's the question. So I would be comfortable with this maybe falling back to a non-mandatory, but I definitely think it's a must.
I think though, with several working with all the details, but on must support kind of means you've got it, you should put it in there, right? And there's always information, right? And if the cardinality is 0, it means you can't rely on it being there. So you're going to have to always go to service request, which would then alleviate the point of making a must support. I would suggest that if we're going to make it 0, we leave it as is and make it not must support. That you actually say, well, it's only on the service request, and you always have to get it from the service request because you know it's always going to be there. Otherwise, we're kind of half and half, and you won't know whether you can trust it or not.
So some context around why the original implementation that I was involved in was, with the rationale, was in the context of directed orders or requests. And we were using subscriptions, so there was an element of push, even though there was a push pull or a notification pull. But anyway, the idea was to basically put as much information necessary on the task for the recipients to do the bare minimum necessary to get the patient record into their system without necessarily having all the details of the service request itself. So that would be potentially a secondary step. Once the person attends, then you can pull down the service request. But I'm talking about sort of access control and, privacy and all those sorts of aspects. But that was kind of some of the rationale that I had originally about wanting to include a patient on the task.
I think fire does it in many aspects. Like you find where a patient is on observation, also a dynamic report. You could argue, observation is part of that dynamic report, so why do I need patient on dynamic report? And it's kind of fire often does this, so each resource can stand alone, like it has its context. I think that's sort of what's going on here. It's a convenience. It means you can bring up a task and for a set of patients quite easily, rather than having to know what the task is pointing at and then find the task on that thing. It makes the task stand alone. It has certain context and
do the sorts of use cases that Michael was talking about, having a task list.
But, it doesn't solve everything, because I can think it's some questions if you want to show, hey, here's the list of pending pathology reports for the patient, right? And they can easily find the task for the patient, that list, but they probably also want to say, and what was the test? Is that there? Go back there. But it's not.
I think you look those up when you go to that task table.
Yeah, you see, the task doesn't have and the test. Now you're on service, but you could argue the patient's there. That's kind of any point.
But then the point Michael raises is, I think, it's problematic. Well, it's problematic, but it's actually interesting in that you either make it mandatory, because the problem is the must support implication. If you've got it, you have to include it. And that means you're always going to have it, and if you always have to include it, and therefore if you make it must support, you've actually implied it's mandatory.
I'm in touch for
But are you then saying it's mandatory as well? Because if you say it's must support and it's optional, then you've kind of gone, well, no, honestly.
Are we making a generic task for all tasks, or are we making a task for dynamic? We're making a task for dynamic requesting, I know, and we've decided that they're all going to be on patients and not for the bars, as Stephen brought up. If we're making those decisions, then it's always mandatory. Can't have a service request that isn't for those.
But do we think that then into the future that adding into it other uses, for instance, other clubs or whatever else it is, so there's an alternative beneficiary?
Are we making now a base class like we use service request, and we're going to inherit off that with diagnostic tasks?
Well, I think we're actually going to get up to this anyway, because we will likely have unique attribute constraints for pathology and radiology in task anyway. So yeah. I think we are going to be talking about a base class.
Yeah, I mean, the way we approached it the last round of service request was we actually didn't make those decisions. They became implementation detail, right? So we need to make sure we're making the decision in the right context, and it is about that pathology or imaging request task. That's the context of what we're doing here. How this exactly gets implemented about base classes and the like will be worked through the implementation detail, but we need to make sure what we want, what the intent of this is, and getting that decision made, and then we can work out how that gets implemented in the spec.
I agree.
So do we want to,
Unless you can think of why diagnostic you would not have patient for true yet, but as long as it's direct to both, and that's what we're trying to target, and we're not trying to target some very generic part of it. But that's not to say we won't have a patient.
No, that might be another, that might be an outcome of that. If we do have something generic, that is much more open. But for what we need here for these use cases, we're quite specific about what we do.
I guess looking in the reverse though, what's the harm, right? So you're creating service requests. Assume it's always going to have a patient. So you're going to put the same reference on this request. Like we're not asking for another call to the database, or like you're already instructed and have this patient reference.
And that's the kind of intent here, is that this is the same as a service request subject, which is must support, which is one-to-one, and it's AU patient. So
Are we saying that must support and one-to-one are coupled?
they pretty much like this, yes.
Well, they are.
Yeah.
It's always an application.
Yes. That's right.
Must support will not and should not require sort of to be coupled with one-to-one cardinality.
But there'll be different obligations on that must support for different actors. What that means, like, so must support. Yeah.
Must support basically just say that if I have the data, I have to populate it, and if I receive the data, I have some way to sort of manage it. It doesn't say that the cardinality has to be one-to-one. In that case, then if that's the interpretation, we have problem.
no, when you're saying in this particular case, Stephen, that it's already one-to-one on the service request. We already know what the service request, we know what the patient is associated with the service request. So it doesn't make sense for this to be optional and must support, because the obligations kind of say, well, you've got to provide one if you want. If you have one, in case we've always got one, so we know we'll make it one-to-one.
All right, okay, fair enough in that context.
But must support, agree, is independent of cardinality.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, I probably misinterpreted the initial question and one quick yes. So, yes,
So are we ready for a motion? 'Cause I'm willing to move as is.
I'll second that.
So motion by Heath, seconded by Michael Wilson, as it stands for must support of yes, cardinality of one-to-one, and the reference is on AU patient.
I just need to work out how to share my screen again. What's going to do this? Give me a second. I'll straighten it out. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes, we'll make an amendment to that being AU4 patient, not AU patient. And I'm just still trying to share my screen. So this is request proposal to I can't vote. That's my vote for the minutes.
You get a phone now?
Yeah, no, it's
All right, we're going to close this vote in 3, 2, 1. 33 plus Michaels is 34 in the affirmative for proposal 2, which is task.4. 35 is the final number, so we'll come back to
one
those
negative,
slides. 1 negative, 1 abstain. Thank you.
Rock mark. One done. requester. So same sort of thing. So here, this is the creator of the task. Well, that's the definition from fire. And the intent here is that we will be the same as the service request stuff. So
you are excluding. So you're excluding an internal workflow where the requester might be different from the original requester.
yeah, so we're using the same concept as requester as we had in the first request.
We're not talking about relay request.
No, not about relay. Internal, like say, for example, in an organization where you receive a service request and you respond internal parts of that task, where you identify your internal request that is different from the original request. So you are technically excluding that.
Yeah, but those had been identified as out of scope. I can't remember the term was it.
It's anyway.
Sendaways.
The doctor, the person what things to be done, that the interaction between them and the provider who's going to do it, not in some or provider.
So essentially the same argument we had for patient, but identifying this as being must support cardinality of 1-to-1 and reference AU corporate practitioner role, which is the same as the requester on service request.
I guess it's been very much the same argument, say, or it's going to be the patient, and the question is the requester.
So,
Same reason.
so based on that, I make this proposal that it must support cardinality of 1-to-1 and references AU for practitioner role, same as service request.
Is there a second for the motion? There we go, Andy.
I have to get more efficient with this jumping the screen. Might get someone else to do it later.
Practitioner. Practitioner is the individual with their name, personal details. The practitioner role includes who they're employed by, so it's in the context of an organisation location, but most importantly, that's where we put their Medicare provider number. Because of their location specific. So that's the primary reason why we're saying practitioner role. Provider number go.
Sorry, Dan, online, you had something, a comment?
I just had a question, sorry, about sendaways. How are we going to track the originator of the request for a sendaWay?
So I'd argue sendaways are out of scope. So we're not here to find a sendaWay system between labs. So just as a paper request comes into your lab today, doesn't have a whole lot of fields on it about how you might then send that to another lab internally. It's no different. We're at scope, the request from the requester to the lab. What the lab wants to then do with that, because maybe they don't do that test and they send it to another lab, that's a different scope that you can use that.
Yeah, it has been identified as out of scope originally.
Okay. Apologies.
That's a very valid question.
All right, if that's all, we'll close the voting on proposal 3 for dot requester. Let the minutes show it's 26 in the affirmative, 1 negative, and 3 abstains. The motion passes. Jakey, 28 in the affirmative, and we'll close that.
Group identifier. So an identifier that links together multiple tasks and other requests that were created in the same context. So that here. So this is intended, well, this is total, it's intended to be the same as the placer group number that was in service request requisition. So that screenshot there is of the definition of requisition in service request, and it's identified as an AU local order identifier with a pattern of PTN, which is placer group number. So this is part of that group that we're going to talk about when there's multiple tests ordered together. Each service request represents one of those. There is a task for each of those, and this will give us the ability to group those together so that we know they're all part of the same order. And by copying this into the task, the same as what we had before, we'll be able to identify which tasks belong together.
And that's why we don't want to get into barcodes.
That's right. That's a conversation we will have to have at some point about how we actually, what form this is and how we generate it, how we use it, and the like. At the moment, it's identified as a placer group number. So the proposal here is exactly the same as what it was on service request requisition. So must support cardinality 1-to-1. The type is an AU or local order identifier, and its code is a PGM, placer group number. It's unique identifier assigned to group orders by the placer.
Michael Osborne has moved as is. Do we have a second? Andy seconds. And we'll just flick over to them and see.
Getting better.
Right. Is four. Votes and thumbs up on this one. Angus liked this one.
With 5 thumbs up.
All right, we'll close this vote here. For the minutes, it's 35 in the affirmative, 0 negative, 1 abstaining.
So task intent indicates the level of actionability associated with the task. I don't know what that is. This is a proposed task, planned task, actual task, etc. So I think I've got other slides that might help. This is actually cardinality of 1-to-1 in the base spec. So it's there, we have to have it. The terminology binding here is on task intent and it's required. So showing what's in that binding, when required binding, we've got unknown, proposal, plan, order, original order, reflex order, fill-up order, instance order, option. So pick the one that's really relevant for us at the moment with our current R1 scope. In this case, it's likely to be order. The request represents a request, demand, and authorization for action by a practitioner. So we need to work out whether we're going to fix this or provide it open or the like. So Michael, what's one direction?
So reflex orders in there, and that's the so the reflex order goes in that black picture is when like a pathologist had a test on and might be something like and is that going to be reflected in the order in the HLS? That company wants to take it back in and that system, I just only it's been requested by practitioners.
So, I mean, that would be a task probably of something from a service. Yeah. So I'm going back to Michael's suggestion or question around do we lock this down? I would be in favour to take all of this discussion out of it away and just say here it is black and before now.
Again, we're talking with all of this we're doing now, this is R1, right? This will go through another ballot process at some point, we'll get comment and all that on it as well. So the idea here is, I think if you're going to create one of these and you're not sure which one to do and you pick something and you send someone who then goes, I don't know, why did they pick that one? I don't know how to process that. It's trying to have a starting point where we all understand what it is and that we can implement and then build it out over time as the use cases expand.
Once that goes to more, so
that's right, yeah.
Yeah, but it's useful to know that the developers do it versus
I think it's the complexity one. So it's absolutely, I can see a future one day where, you order 2 tests, it goes into the lab, does the result of those, adds on another test, and then it'd be nice to then say, then the lab sends back a new service request to attach to the other one, say, we've added this other test on, and that one would be the task around that, would be this reflex. And you might find that task is even unique in itself because it's now like a task the lab's creating for itself for the doctor to acknowledge, like that we're doing this extra test. So I don't dispute all that in the long term, but I think it's far down the road.
Okay. Does the patient care? Does the requester care? No.
I think for Michael, we go to the proposal slide. We're only showing the order as the code here.
A reflex order is usually, I like to view it like it's a reflex actually. It's like something you've got a result, which you then, because of that confirmation, or reflects to that, you adding another test on. Maybe a filler order is just, still just adding some order on with a filler. I don't know. I don't know what filler order is.
Well, I would argue that there's stuff there. So, you should consider
I think
for this to be R1
I think that the opposite is also true. If you include it, then you better be very careful about what it means to include it. Like, because now what does it mean for me to develop it to get a reflex order? Like, and a reflex task, like that's now a whole different task to the task we initially had in mind that's coming from the doctor to the lab.
so. The current proposal, I believe, is to only include order as the scope.
I'm sorry, just want to start with a question. I like disagree with the intent of order, and I agree that that was the pose that makes the most sense. My question is, is that constrained for action by a practitioner, but in eRequesting, where we said that it must be a practitioner role, is that conflict an issue? I may be getting to
Where do you see the concept? So a practitioner role wouldn't be able to create a task that's of type order? Or?
That's the question, because we have if the practitioner role implies practitioner exists, but because the service request we're constrained to say it must be a practitioner role that is generating the service request, which then would be inherited by the task. If that order is the definition of order here is constrained to say for action by a practitioner, the conflict is between the two.
Implicitly, a practitioner is going to do it. Now, the actual owner of this is actually going to be probably an organisation, but through the organisation, that practitioner, so really that should probably be a lowercase p, not an uppercase.
So where it's
C.
I agree. The lower P, what they really mean.
Yeah. It's also, I think you think of it as inherited from. It's only referencing to. So it is actually the service request stands alone from the task. So it doesn't have to imply that all of the constraints of the service request live with the task.
Okay.
So to play devil's advocate, do we need proposals and plans for like the systems, the doctor working through it or replacing it.
You're a broad line. And it's been up.
What goes on the wire across. Yeah.
I have
Days in Vegas.
I have a question. If there ever be a use case where the task mechanics is unknown,
Can we defer that until this afternoon?
Yeah, again, I think
With obligations, leasing data.
we do
Tomorrow afternoon.
need to focus on intent bar one, right? About having a shared understanding.
It's actually a good point.
It is, yeah.
And I will be doing advanced topics on this request to borrow, about missing data and suppressed data, and this is associated with that. So let's
just
have a
wonder
chat about
if
that.
anyone would ever do a task with intent unknown, so I don't think that it's sensitive.
maybe we do need to include unknown.
We also have, remember we haven't got there yet, but we have tasks that static draft. And not doing that, you have a draft.
Unknown, in the context of missing data, unknown is the value we need to use. But I think the proposal you may want to consider a change to the motion to include unknown.
I think that this is something you were going to create, and the proposal here is a fixed value, right? So your system actually doesn't even need to just have it stored somewhere. But when you're creating the task, you hard code it to order, right? So I don't know that this is necessarily missing data because it's not something you need to store. You just need to know how to form a task and populate it, hard code the value order. So I think it's a little bit different, but
I struggle about why, what scenario it's going to be unknown, but some other time.
So do I. I'm happy to leave it as is.
so with this proposal here, really all we're adding here is must support and the fixed value of order, because it's already identified as one-to-one by spec. It's already got a task intent finding required. So that's already there, that we already have to do that. That's already part of it. But we're just really here adding must support and fixed value order. So I'd like to make that proposal, that intent must support fixed value order.
You have a second? Andy? So motioned and seconded that it is must support one-to-one with a fixed value of order. All right.
I'd like to add my affirmative vote.
So we'll call the votes there at 29 in the affirmative, 0 negative, and 8 abstaining.
Plus one for me.
Okay, we had another one sneak through. So now it's 30 in the affirmative. I think we've got time for one more, and then we'll break for lunch. If the discussion runs over, we might have to defer till after lunch and come back for the vote itself. But we'll see how we go. I think it's relatively straightforward in the grand scheme of things. We'll see what Angus wants to do.
Task priority. This might actually be a little bit dangerous. So indicates how quickly the task should be addressed with respect to other requests. And it's got a required binding on this already identified for request priority, routine, urgent, ASAP, and staff. One thing of note here is for service request, we didn't talk about priority. So I think that was an oversight, something that we didn't really bring up and we didn't have a vote on. We didn't discuss. So it's something we might have to circle back around for the service request. So the question will be here around whether we need priority on the task. We manage the task priority. Potentially whether we don't and we'll rely on service request at some point when we get it in there, or we have both.
The first question is, would this be any different to like without making a decision about whether or not why the task priority would be different to the service?
I'm I'm wondering whether there's a scenario where at the time the service request created, it was routine. Something happens, and whether that's an internal process where you've got a backlog and you've got to like manage your own order of tasks you're processing, or there's some out of channel thing happened where you get on the phone and say, hey, you need to make this urgent, and therefore the task might be up in priority, leaving the original service request saying it was routine, but the task got updated.
Are we saying there could be multiple tasks per service request?
No, one per service
One
request.
task.
Well, no,
Oh, sorry.
at any given time, you might have multiple tasks existing.
Yeah.
One could be cancelled.
Yeah.
So there should be one active task. So
That's
that's
good.
one active task, but you could certainly have a series of cancelled tasks, ask different parties to fulfill it. They'll go bugger off and not doing it. And you're kind of moving your vehicle along until you get to the one that can do it.
They'll note here the meaning if missing, this task should be performed with normal priority. Well, so got a starting point for this, that it probably is useful to have it on the task. Like it must support. You don't have to provide it. So it's 0 to 1. The binding stays the same, required binding request priority, and we would have the codes that are already in that. We wouldn't further restrict it for the starting point.
So they can use the word urgent.
When they conflict between the service request and the task. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
No. So it should only go with the filler one, and that's what your obligation rests for fulfillment. It doesn't rest on the service request. Service request is kind of, yes, you read information from it where needed, but tasks should always override, but it's specific to your fulfillment.
I think that provides the two, again, the record of the service request is what was originally requested. If for whatever reason the task priority may have changed, and I mean, it's likely to go up and down, you could expect, but that the filler has reprioritized it for a reason.
Well, you got to be careful with that one because, you know, is that actually, I know in theory you wouldn't cancel the first one and recreate it simply to change priority, but, you know, if that's a pattern that you're saying, well, you can actually make modifications in fulfillment and leave that service request invalid in effect or not 100% accurate anymore. I mean, I think that's not a good pattern to kind of get behind. My question about this is whether the priority values are appropriate and whether they are all needed in community for our use cases. Do we need things like staff, for instance? Is that actually meaningful in community?
You know, the document priority codes from someone who is standard set.
Yeah, this is the request priority set. So that's, and that the binding on this in the base spec is already there as required. So we can constrain it. We can say less. We can't constrain it.
I know for me, if we allowed but it's something we just like to be a routine or urgent. We just rolled it up and then the stat version of the same thing.
On your paper form, I think you can sort of tick box, haven't you? Urgent.
But I'm not against having the granularity for the lab that wants to define that in some way, like really for us to determine how we define all those four values.
And that's the thing. You know, if we can't come up with that differentiating community use case for those things, I'm just wondering why we would at this stage include them. It would just create, I think, confusion.
So just friendly name. Some one system called it stat, another one system called it urgent. It all means the same to us, but you want to call it that, fine. It's no, for me, it's no harm having all four. Like it's needed having whether one's different to another.
Well, no, it's not. It's actually in terms of this, you're creating an interoperability contract between places and fillers. If I do stat and stat means this to you and it means something else to someone else.
It really reaches all the time. Created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels of urgency. They're trying to say standard, most urgent, HB lower, and urgent lower than that, and routine's routine. And high level wants to provide that sort of service, fine, but otherwise it's just a Boolean either urgent or isn't. Like why block off the future where we do have 5 levels of urgency?
And we haven't,
Maybe what we'll do it faster.
locked off our value sets previously.
Well, but have we had a situation like this previously where they're actually the same qualification? I mean, they might as well be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. 0 routine, and then 1 is kind of urgent, and ASAP is 2, and stats 3. I mean,
Going back to your contract, I don't think there's any dispute about the meaning of these concepts. It's quite well defined. So
yes, but I'm asking whether it applies in community requesting.
I feel that we're going to get to the next use case pretty quickly, and then to open it up again, and it would be more disruptive to do that than actually have them unconstrained at this point.
I'm of that. It's like I only want to bully it or not, but you lock that down now, and there's a lot of pain later that when we hospital's out of scope. But when you get to hospital, they might go, "Oh no, it's very different. We have these different," and then it would just be there, right? Like what's it's got a extension of the lab, like what they do with it.
I mean, when it comes to obligations, and I know this is this afternoon, but just very briefly, there's more obligation on the filler than there is on our placer. So as long as the fillers in the room understand the implications of that as part of this decision, because you will have to be able to receive all 4 of these and be able to handle them. Whereas places can choose to do.
We've got 1 to 2 minutes. Is anybody happy to motion as it is, or do you want to come back to this after lunch?
I'll motion.
So Heath has motioned and Angus is second for the proposal as it stands now, which is 0 to 1 and must support. The binding is the request priority as required, and the codes are the 4 codes: routine, urgent, ASAP, stat.
Michael, when are we going to go back to service request?
Yeah, we'll have to, I mean, there's probably, maybe that's something that actually should come out for ballot for comment. Hopefully someone will make a comment in the ballot to say that we haven't prioritized, they have priority, must support service request. That would mean then we can address it through ballot comment.
All right, well, we'll call the votes there. It's 30 in the affirmative, 0 negative, 11 abstaining. And then we'll kick off again after lunch. We come back at one window. So
apologies, I got my hand up too late. What were we thinking for a time study where it needs to be at a specific time? I'm not saying it can't use those codes that we just did, but did anybody have a thought there?
What we did,
The question was, Philip, Michael Osborne, was what code would you use?
So in my system, granted it's a hospital system, we would pick that as a different reporting priority, which means so like routine would mean wait to the normal collection run, and then stat is usually get it done immediately, whether it's urgent or stat depends on client by client, and then we'd usually have a third one for time study that's neither routine nor stat or urgent to identify that you shouldn't wait for a specific collection time. It's going to be done at a specific time because of whatever other things are happening on that patient.
Does that service at the current?
No, there is a task dot execution period, so you can set when you want fulfillment to be completed, but we would need to we need to be quite specific about the semantics of combinations of attributes and what the intent was around that, because execution occurrence would equally be used, like execution period should equally be obviously things like, I want this request to be done in 3 months' time, and then you set a window in the future for that, whereas you could also overlay it for those kind of things well. There's no specific priority mechanism to take a priority way and replace it with some date time.
Didn't quite get Phil. Phil, you said you're thinking of a status for time, like so urgent, routine, and at this time. Is that sort of what you're thinking?
Yeah, it's time dependent.
Urgent, routine, and that other specific. So you got it.
It'd be like the pre and post dose sort of test where you want to time it specifically in relation to a administration. Like you want to take the blood an hour before the dose or an hour after. And it depends when that dose is.
I have a feeling I've seen something
Glucose tolerance
somewhere,
tests and some
maybe
of
on the
those kinds of
service
things where you're
request.
gonna.
Sorry, going back.
Sorry, I was going to say you
Just
also
a
have.
question, Phil. Would you use routine as a thing, but then have the task start at a different time? Would that suffice?
We would, but the routine normally in hospital workflows means you're waiting until the next normal collection run. So you, whatever time you pick in one way, you're usually ignoring a rounding. Whereas, you know, for the pre and post dose of medications, glucose tolerance tests, those kinds of things, you need to schedule them at specific times, or even like blood culture ×3, right? You're going to have them a minute off so that the results come in as successive items instead of 3 results in the exact same time. So there's, and so that may just be my system, I get that, but there's rationale of there are times where you care about the time, and then there are times where you don't.
Is this on the
reporting
request?
priority is what drives that, at least for me. Yes. It is. Not maybe pre-filled out by an order set, but it is on the requester. Yes.
Yeah, well, I guess what I was saying is that it would run at routine after the time for the task kicked off.
And as far as a reporting priority, it's going to go through the normal routine reporting priority, but the collection priority as a separate field has these kinds of concepts. Yep.
So my read of the fire spec is it's not trying to make the priority some sort of time. Like it has other timed elements, so you know, service requested occurrence and task has, you said earlier, coming execution period. I think, but I don't think there's any conflating time into the priority. So, you know, you say it's routine, but I want it done at this time. Might be a bit odd to say it's urgent, but I want it done at this time. But to me, that fire, at least, I see them as 2 very different concepts. That they're not sort of shoehorning time into priority.
There is a restriction period in the class specification when you fulfill the store. And you don't have to specify priority, right? It was optional for 0. So you could specify priority and time.
I'll say I want it done in 1 minute now, but it's just routine.
But from what I'm hearing from Phil is he's already got kind of a scheme that may not be overly interoperable or common understanding of what they mean, but it sounds like you've got a way of you're already doing it.
Maybe when you say time, right? I don't want it done at time. That's almost irrelevant of the urgency, right? If you want it done at 10 o'clock on Tuesday, then you want it done at 10 o'clock on Tuesday. You're not trying to say urgent or routine or anything, right? Say you want it done in 1 minute now, but if you're assuming you want it urgent done, and you're specific when you want it done. The priority almost goes out the window when you define it for the time you want it done.
That's actually a bigger problem with this, and it's required binding in multiple pages.
Yeah. We can't extend it.
We can't change it. That's in the
Can't extend it.
Didn't we also previously had discussion around, is this urgent, as in I need this collected urgently, or do I actually need to report urgently?
Mm.
And,
We'll
and
come
it may
back
just
to
need
this.
to go on the, yeah, that may just need to go in the car park because it's a more critical piece when you start talking about inpatient kind of workflows than an outpatient. Like an outpatient,
So-
you're going to order glucose tolerance test, right?
Phil,
And then-
we'll come
and then
back
it's
to
up
this
the
after
lab
lunch.
to order the individual symptom tests. Yeah.
Yeah. Philip, look, we'll come back to it after lunch. So we'll be back about 1:20 for the people in the room and online. Go eat and then we'll see what we can come up with.
1:20.
Yeah, 1:20, 1:20. 40 minutes.